All right, let's take a look at some introductory questions for the problem of freedom and determinism. Are we free or determined? This is another kind of age-old question, and there's a lot of other theories and arguments that kind of bear on what we say about this question. It's a question about a very important event in the universe, a human action. There's lots of other events in the universe, things falling, celestial bodies moving, bodies growing, grass growing. There's lots of events in the world, and it looks like now more than ever, I'm thinking maybe more so than in the kind of ancient history of man, it appears that our explanation for all of the other events in the universe is that they are governed by deterministic scientific laws, like the law of gravity, laws of thermodynamics. Now we've got genetics, and it looks like the universe is a very complex system that is physical and governed by deterministic laws of science, laws of nature. So the question here is, well, how do human actions fit into that picture of the universe? If that's the kind of universe we live in, what about us? Is a human action just like any other event governed by laws of physics, or are human actions special and different? And how can we really justify thinking that we're so special and different? What to say about human actions? That's the issue. In a way that's consistent with what else we know about the universe and events within it, seeing that a human action is one event amongst many in the universe. Okay, and I guess another thing that comes into play here is the question of moral responsibility. Whether we are free or determined seems to make all the difference, or at least some difference, in whether we can sensibly be held morally responsible for our actions. I mean, it seems like, maybe all hell would break loose if we weren't, or something. But I guess the idea here is that if a human action is strictly determined by antecedent causes, then we couldn't have done otherwise than what we did because we were determined to do what we did. How can we make sense of holding us responsible for doing something when we couldn't have done any differently? Question. All right, there's a lot more to be said about this. Actually, the question of monism and dualism, which is really the mind-body problem, kind of bears on this. If it turns out that we really have minds, like Descartes thought, and that there are immaterial entities in the universe, and our minds are those, then maybe we could say that our minds are separate from the causal order of the universe, whereas our bodies are. So if dualism is true, like Descartes wanted to say, then maybe there's some room for freedom, or more room for freedom, as compared to the physicalist definition of the mind, which says that the mind, so-called mind, is really just a complex physical system, your brain and your central nervous system. Well, that is a physical system which presumably would be determined by physical laws, and now there's really a question about what to say about human freedom. So maybe this question about whether we're free or determined really kind of pushes back to whether or not our mind is physical or not. Okay, so let me just quickly look at a couple of these. We have here a question about an event is determined if not just be that it's influenced by other factors. There might be non-deterministic influences, like peer pressure or something like that would be, or a threat is an influence, but we wouldn't say it's strictly deterministic. And we certainly wouldn't say that it's determined if it's not governed by the law of causality. That seems to be what would make it free. Nor is it determined if it's uncaused. Again, it's supposedly deterministic because of its being caused, and the relation between cause and effect being a deterministic one, so it wouldn't be D. So A, and this actually is a fairly subtle definition, that the result, if an event is the result of if the result of antecedent events and would recur if those antecedent conditions recurred. Seems like an easier thing to say. If you think about that, it's saying that an event must occur given that certain antecedent events occurred, which leaves some room for saying that that event may not have occurred, but that would have to involve those antecedent events not occurring. So given that the history of the universe was such and such, the only possible result for the next event is this. Had the history of the universe been different, there might be a different result or effect right now, but that's the deterministic link. Given that there were certain antecedent conditions, there was only one possible outcome. It was determined by those antecedent conditions, even though those antecedent conditions could have been gone differently. That just means there would have been a different deterministic effect from those different antecedent events or causes, but it would still be deterministic. Okay, it's a little complicated, but the answer is fairly straightforward. Okay, fatalism and predeterminism, predestination, we've got all that. Basically, determinism says that what I had just mentioned, that given certain antecedent conditions, an event will occur. That doesn't mean that an event will happen no matter what. It means that an event will happen given that there are certain antecedent causes. Fatalism and predestination say that an event will happen no matter what. So that's a subtle kind of difference there. So number 3, we've kind of already gotten into that a little bit. The problem of freedom and determinism is this. If every event has a cause, how can human actions, assuming they are events, be free? So the idea here is that the relation between cause and effect is a deterministic one. Human actions have causes. Well, that looks like that they are thus necessary effects or deterministic effects of those causes, since the relation between cause and effect generally is thought to be a deterministic one. If we grant that human actions have causes, looks like we're on the road to determinism, which leaves no room for freedom. So how can they be free if they're caused? There are some subtle positions which try to say it can be both. Soft determinism, you can kind of take a look in the text for that. It's an interesting attempt to try to say that determinism is compatible with freedom. So long as what determines our actions is our own will and volition and desires, then we can say it's free, even if there's a deterministic connection between our will and our desire and our action. So long as it's determined by our determined by our desires, we can say it's still free. Okay, that's a subtle position. Interesting. Okay, last dilemma of freedom and determinism appears to leave us with the choice of denying the law of causality or denying people are responsible for what they do. Yes. Some people have tried to kind of deconstruct that dilemma, but that's the dilemma that everybody's responding to. And that's why it's a dilemma, because it looks like the law of causality is true. It also looks like we're responsible for what we do, but we can't have it both ways, or so it would appear. So that's why it's a kind of interesting, long-standing dilemma, and a lot of people have talked about it, and it's an interesting thing. We just kind of continue living, not really knowing the answer, but it's an interesting underlying philosophical question about everything that we do. Okay, talk to you later.